Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live stream. This is Mnar Adley. I'm the founder and director of MintPress News. This is our official MintPress News live stream, Mintcast. It's an interview series featuring dissenting voices the establishment would rather silence. And today I am joined by my co-host, Alan MacLeod. How are you, Alan?
I'm doing very well indeed. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you for being here with us. So, as always, this podcast is viewer funded. So, if you'd like to support us, you can become a member of our Patreon. And we always appreciate when you like, share, and subscribe. So, if you've been following our coverage at MintPress News for the past decade, we have made covering our Fourth Amendment rights and privacy and the entire surveillance state has been a major topic that we have covered in detail here. And today, millions of people around the world have been attracted to cryptocurrency because of the supposed privacy benefit it entails, and also that it's decentralized. So today we'll be talking about a shady US spy firm called Anomaly Six that has just been exposed by investigative journalist Kit Klarenberg in a series of investigations, one for the Gray Zone, and the latest published today on MintPress News. Kit has uncovered how intelligence services the world over can track actual cryptocurrency transactions to their source. Breaking that idea that the blockchain is anonymous. So, therefore, he has exposed how these intelligence agencies can identify users by monitoring the movements of smartphones, affecting over 3 billion smartphone users. So this is quite the story that we have here. Alan.
So that story, again, is called Shadowy US Spy Firm Promises to Surveil Crypto Users for the Highest Bidder and can be exclusively read at MintPress News right now. The author is Kit Klarenberg, an investigative journalist who covers the intelligence services and how they shape politics and public perceptions. Welcome to the show, Kit.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good.
Yeah, we're doing very well. So I guess the first question I want to hit with you is just the big one. It's about your latest bombshell report, which I repeat is called Shadowy US Spy Firm Promises to Surveil Crypto Users for the Highest Bidder. It details how leaked documents from this firm called Anomaly Six provide cryptocurrency users' identities. Prove that those identities are not nearly as anonymous as they might hope, and that sophisticated software now exists that allows organizations to identify cryptocurrencies, users' names, locations, and virtually everything else about them. Is that correct? If so, could you tell us a bit more about Anomaly 6? Where do they come from and who works for them? Or who do they work for as well?
Sure. So Anomaly Six, they're a private spying firm that was set up by two military intelligence veterans a few years ago. There's been virtually no media coverage whatsoever of their activities. It's known that they provided some services to the Pentagon. There has been, there was a report earlier this year in the Intercept, but on their activities. But aside from that, they're effectively completely shadowy and unknown. Again, what is known is that they insert what are called software development kits, which are effectively a software in hundreds of popular smartphone apps and Internet of Things, IoT, like Amazon Echo apps. I'm yet to report on it, but there's a rather disturbing document where they go into the most popular apps per country and where they embed this software, and this allows them to effectively drill down from a vast data set where users travel to and where they live. It's in theory it's anonymized data. so that they're not immediately presented with somebody's name and address by token of someone using an app in which they've maliciously embedded the software, but completely legally, I might add. Like, at least from a regulatory perspective, what they're doing is kosher, it seems. But in effect, they carve through all these layers of anonymity, and using various kind of open source tools, they can build up a very, very, very detailed picture of someone. In my initial article on this for the Grey Zone, I reported on a sales pitch where they effectively tracked this academic who traveled to North Korea, and it had photos of his children and the schools and universities they attended, and his home address, photos of his home, and all. I mean, it's deeply disturbing stuff. Anyway, so I mean, they are skirting very, very, very close to the wind in terms of what's acceptable. They are obviously not subject to the same legislation and regulations which in theory prevent major spying agencies like the CIA, NSA, and GCHQ spy on their own populations. And they're doing so in total secret. It's really quite disturbing.
Well, obviously, one of the biggest selling points of using cryptocurrency for the last decade is the fact that blockchain technology allows for anonymity, but clearly the authorities and government the world over have kind of taken over cryptocurrency, and so but the fact that the blockchain technology has promised that anonymity has made it attractive to people who want to use who want to make transactions outside of any sort of like government interference and so forth. So this has attracted a lot of activists all around the world to want to use this. So the question, I guess, is let's see here. I lost my question here. Can you talk a little bit about how blockchain has lost its anonymity?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, blockchain is the only public part of a cryptocurrency transaction, and it's a way of ensuring that funds reach their destination. But in theory, the sender and receiver can be and typically are anonymous, and various cryptocurrency platforms and currencies themselves are graded online on the basis of their privacy. It's the anonymity within crypto is quite so intensive that there are crypto firms that have pitched for venture capital funding and have received millions or hundreds of millions in return, when they don't even disclose who their CEO or staff are. They use pseudonyms or kind of NFT avatars, and which that's really quite unprecedented. And I think, and as you mentioned, this is attractive to political activists because in effect, if you are in a repressive country, or or even a Western liberal democracy, quote unquote, this is a way of ensuring that you can receive support from overseas or even domestically without creating a paper trail. People don't have to disclose that they're giving money to activists and whatnot, and then this can be spent by activists on what they need to for their political activities, and they can send money to each other in effective secret, organize events, construct local and international support networks, and authorities are left none the wiser. We'll get into this in more detail. Those countries also use it to circumvent absolutely crippling genocidal US sanctions. Venezuela, Iran, Russia, and even political groups like Hezbollah, which are sanctioned. It uses cryptocurrency for its various social programs in Lebanon and elsewhere in the Middle East. And so, the fact that intelligence and security and intelligence services are intensely interested in crypto and want to break through its its layers of secrecy is unsurprising. And in June, had successfully traced and recovered 2.3 million in Bitcoin, which had been extorted by hackers from Colonial Pipeline. They conducted ransomware. The group was called dark side, I think, and it carried out a ransomware attack whereby it threatened the company that it told the company it would permanently take its servers offline unless it handed over a vast quantity of money. I mean, and even a brief shutdown had crashed the company's computer systems and caused fuel shortages and a spike in gas prices. So they handed over the money very readily, and the FBI successfully tracked this, and they found that it had been funneled through 23 separate cryptocurrency accounts, and they identified the ultimate owners of these. I mean, in that instance, it's probably a good thing. I mean, we don't want we don't want individuals or people being successfully held to ransom by hackers, but equally, like, we know that the CIA is taking a very keen interest in crypto, and like William Burns in December last year, he said that the agency was engaged in a number of different projects focused on cryptocurrency, and I think that that's where you're getting into the realm of keeping an eye on and tracking individuals and organizations that are helping countries beat sanctions. And so, yeah, I mean, that's really quite disturbing. But I mean, just more generally as well, surveillance of financial transactions is on an ever developing story. We know for a fact that major intelligence services are very, very keen on and happy for people to use digital payments because it's very easy to track. Cryptocurrency, in theory, allows people to circumvent those traditional structures, and so big banks and regulators and spies don't know what they're up to. It seems this has been mortally compromised now thanks to Anomaly 6.
Well, you say it's been mortally compromised. What is the scale of the surveillance that Anomaly 6 can boast? Is this a minor operation? How, in other words, is its reach, and how wide are the implications for what you've uncovered? And is this something only crypto holders should care about, or is it a wider story?
I mean, it's absolutely huge. I mean, I think it's of global significance. I mean, the company boasts in its marketing material of being able to monitor 3 billion smartphone devices in real time, and the movements of these people, even when they're on flights. That's equivalent to a fifth of the world's total population, which that should tell you something. And they. Elsewhere they boast about how they've spied on German citizens, residents of the assorted Five Eyes countries, the global US and UK led spying network, and they have absolutely no compunction. I mean, and this is despite, I mean, this is something we can get into more as we go along. It's clear from the leaked papers in my possession that the company's founders fear, or are pretty certain, that what they're doing is completely legal. Under various international and indeed national data protection regimes, and so, but they don't seem to have any compunction whatsoever. And I think that there have been numerous scandals over the years involving NSA and GCHQ bulk data collection without people's knowledge or consent, and this has been found to be by various courts to have been completely illegal. I suspect that at the very most, what these scandals have done is they've forced the CIA and NSA and other kind of monstrous deep state entities to look elsewhere, probably to the private sphere, in order to cover their tracks and create a kind of level of plausible deniability between these operations. That's where Anomaly 6 steps in.
Yeah, I mean, well, you mentioned the NSA there a few times. Actually, in your article, you specifically write that this has all the makings of an Edward Snowden level international scandal of historic proportions. So is that what you're talking about? Can you explain that a bit further?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that in terms of how rich and detailed the insight these leaked files provide on tradecraft, like how these things are done, I think it's the most detailed since Edward Snowden. I mean, I think ever since Edward Snowden's releases, I think that people have been fairly aware since then that that their phones are effectively a tracking device and can be spied on. But they color and contour, the means by which this happens is it isn't disclosed or acknowledged publicly, and this demonstrates very, very palpably, how it's done. And yes, I mean, I think that they in the leak files they specifically refer to previous scandals and court judgments involving the CIA and NSA, which makes them very reticent to market their services openly, or indeed offer them at all in particular jurisdictions. So, for instance, in the European Union, there's a bit of legislation called GDPR, which governs data protection, and it means that if an individual's personal data of any kind, even visiting a website, for any reason, they effectively need to be given permission. They effectively it needs to be done with their knowledge and consent. By definition, Anomaly 6 doesn't disclose which apps, doesn't disclose publicly which apps it embeds its software in, and so therefore, and yes, when people download apps themselves, it doesn't state, oh yeah, by the way, we'll be handing over vast quantities of your location data to a shadowy private spying firm. So yeah, this would be illegal. Like, the way that they get around this is by, at least in Europe, I mean, and also some other jurisdictions, it seems, they're using a company called Prevail Partners, which is it's a private military company which was founded by a number of former special boat service, SBS, and indeed SAS, which is like the UK's elite special forces veterans, and they're heavily involved in the West proxy war in Ukraine. The I4 the Grey Zone have revealed how they are constructing a secret partisan terror army to carry out incendiary actions in and around Crimea. They also seem to have been involved in the bombing of Kerch Bridge. They brainstormed a number of different scenarios by which the Ukrainians could take it down. They suggested floating a boat full of ammonium nitrate underneath Kerch Bridge and then blowing it up, and they kind of approvingly cited the 2020 Beirut blast, and so they're very, very pleasant people. But yes, that they effectively, it seems, and I have engaged data specialist lawyers and rights groups on this, that they engaged a high-priced law firm to work out a legal fudge by which they could legally, or at least theoretically legally, market and sell Anomaly 6's products to every British intelligence and security service under the sun, the military, but also in countries like Malta and Australia and Denmark. So it's a truly global story. And yes, the purposes of monitoring, it's not just so they can surveil people, it's for counterintelligence purposes, but it's also for asset cultivation, which is really, really sinister. Because I mentioned that academic who traveled to North Korea, they suggested, well, I mean, given that this individual has access beyond the average tourist, either we should be monitoring them very, very closely, and indeed their family, and and we could use him as an asset. We could try and recruit him. Now, I mean, there are numerous stories of people who have been approached by the FBI, for instance, people within the US Muslim community who are asked whether they will turn informant, and when they say no, they are heavily punished. There are repercussions for that. But also, it just seems that that they would take a very, very, very keen interest in almost anyone going anywhere. Everyone in their sites becomes a target for surveillance or recruitment or harassment or worse. And so, you're effectively either pre-criminalizing or pre-recruiting, in theory, the world's entire population. It's deeply disturbing.
Kit, Anomaly 6 is obviously operating completely illegally under national and international data protection laws. Despite that, you wrote, having previously hawked its wares to U.S. Special Operations Commands, you revealed on December 6th at the Grey Zone that Anomaly 6 is now using British private military company Prevail Partners, which is heavily involved in the West proxy war in Ukraine, to market and sell its product to a variety of Western military, security, and intelligence agencies the world over. That's from your article. Who exactly are the customers of Anomaly Six? You mentioned repressive regimes and liberal Western democracies, and the fact that this company's international surveillance is literally reaching and sweeping and invading more than the CIA and NSA combined. So, who are their customers?
No, well, I've mentioned a few. I mean, and I think that the global reach is worth reinforcing because yes, as you say, their clientele will almost inevitably involve repressive governments. So, for instance, it's clear that the Anomaly Six and Prevail have a very close relationship with private spying firms, likewise founded by Western intelligence and security veterans in countries like the United Arab Emirates. Now, you know, the UAE was not that long ago embroiled in a massive scandal because they employed a large number of NSA former NSA operatives to run a spying effort, which not only targeted domestic dissidents and got people who opposed the ruling monarchy jailed for many, many years. They also went after Western activists and journalists who were reporting on conditions in the UAE and the kind of brutal crushing of dissent and torture of detainees. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's what and we saw this with Pegasus as well. The kind of the private spying tool created by Mossad veterans. That when you market and sell these Orwellian wares overseas, it's opening a Pandora's box. Like you never know which government is going to get it into its hands, the purposes to which it will be used. I mean, it's very clear. I mean, there's all sorts of that have been prevailed in internal documents are very clearly expecting to make an enormous amount of money out of this, and they have they claim exclusive rights for marketing these services and getting a huge cut of the overall profits and stuff. And it's like it's really disturbing that that clearly a pure profit motive can override all sorts of basic ethical considerations and indeed legal considerations. And yes, I mean, I think that there is a clear need for kind of concerned citizens the world over to start harassing and pressuring their governments to disclose whether they have a relationship with Anomaly Six, because it won't necessarily be, well, I mean, it certainly won't be public knowledge as yet. I'm working on that, but the Pegasus scandal, it still rages on all the time. We find out that more and more governments, including like governments within Europe, such as Spain and Greece, used Pegasus to spy on journalists. I mean, markedly in a deeply closed and secretive society like Britain, it seems that there's been no disclosure as to whether the British government or any kind of British state or quasi-state agency used this technology. I mean, the fact that one of its key funders and a member of their board was a politically active British oligarch should tend to suggest that it was. And yeah, I mean, unless people press for answers, they're never going to know. And yes, again, literally everyone is in their crosshairs. It's completely indiscriminate. And it's I think I mentioned in my article that relatively recently there was a scandal whereby it was revealed that in trying to track finances flowing to and from Islamic State, the CIA had oh so incidentally hoovered up all of this private sensitive financial data and other data on US citizens. And I mean, there was significant political condemnation at the time, but this was largely ignored, somewhat depressingly. But the fact that any mass spying operation, which is even targeting like a very clear threat or enemy, is going to end up innocent people are going to be drawn into the firing line.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we haven't talked about this article yet is one of my favorite subjects, actually, and that is Venezuela, which comes up a lot in this article. I've written a book about Venezuela, a lot of academic work that focused on that particular country. So that's what really interested me about this a lot. why does Venezuela come up in this story? What's the connection there? Can you explain that for us, please?
Yeah, sure. And I think that you could certainly provide far more detail on the history and impact of US sanctions on Venezuela than I. But I think that for many years, the Venezuela has been subject to absolutely savage and completely punitive, unprovoked sanctions, just purely because Washington doesn't like the government, because they try and do positive things for the working class, and refuse to allow the US to eviscerate their oil industry for their own enrichment. And so this means that not only is there massive import and export restrictions which have destroyed Venezuela's economy and reduced the value of its currency to pretty much zero. I mean, there was the UN Special Rapporteur report in February last year on the impact of sanctions on Caracas that ruled that they were collective punishment, and the country lived on just 1% of its pre-sanctions income, which is just, I mean, this is absolutely extraordinary, unimaginable economic toll. And there's again, I'll leave the floor to you on this, but numerous experts calculate that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of Venezuelans have died as a result of these sanctions, because not only does it prevent them having the money to buy anything, but they also can't access from overseas basic goods like life-saving medicines that people need to take every day, foodstuffs, and this, it was explicitly, when these sanctions were imposed, it was explicitly stated that the US officials knew this would be absolutely ravaging, because Venezuela does not produce, or at least didn't, many of its medicines. It just imported them from abroad. And so, like, in effect, I mean, also these are brutally enforced. Like, they really don't want people breaking these sanctions at all. I mean, in the 90s, for instance, there was a famous chess player called Bobby Fischer who was jailed awaiting extradition to the US because he played at a chess tournament in Yugoslavia at a time when Yugoslavia was heavily sanctioned. Had a similar toll there/here as well. But in effect. And yes, Alex Saab, who was helping the Venezuelan government break sanctions around food, was effectively kidnapped from Cape Verde in 2020, and his trial is ongoing now. My friend and colleague Anya Parampil is covering it in some detail. But yes, they don't want people breaking these sanctions. They want to understand how they are broken. And like I said, the Venezuelan people and the Venezuelan government, one of the ways they do so is via cryptocurrency, which allows them to buy things and also, kind of circumvent export and import restrictions. So, I mean, in my article, I note how one of the kind of sales pitches that Anomaly 6 produced was related to tracking the cryptocurrency transactions of the Venezuelan government sanctioned cryptocurrency exchange, which is known as SunaCrypt, and it manages all crypto activities in the country. And so Anomaly 6, from a vast number of devices in and around the vicinity of SunaCrypt's headquarters, they identified two specific IoT devices, which quote unquote show the value of Anomaly 6's data set in tracking the source and path and recipient of cryptocurrency transactions. And so, by tracking these two devices, it identified their quote unquote bed down locations, i.e. where their owners sleep, and it created a quote unquote pattern of life for their users, i.e. what they do on a daily basis. And it showed, and yes, that they tracked these people while they were on planes going to Argentina and Colombia, and also within Venezuela itself, particularly its border with Colombia. And so it's very, very, very invasive. I mean, the level of detail is quite extraordinary. With a few clicks of a button, you can find out where money has been sent from, where it's gone, and who sent it, and indeed what they get up to on a daily basis.
And I want to talk. I would love if Alan actually could tell us a little bit more about the maximum pressure campaign that Venezuela has experienced by the United States through these medieval sanctions. Alan, can you give us more details about these and how these sanctions, I mean, if they're going to be changing anytime soon with under the Biden administration?
Yeah, sure. So it seems like another lifetime ago, but not so long ago, Venezuela was actually booming. The society was flourishing. All sorts of indicators that the UN used to track poverty and quality of life were absolutely skyrocketing in a positive way. So between 2002 and 2013, poverty was reduced by half and extreme poverty by three quarters. Venezuela was declared illiteracy free in just a few years. The United Nations even gave the country a special recommendation for having reduced poverty in such a short period of time. It was really somewhere which academics and politicians of all stripes were looking to try to get answers. However, fast forward to today, after a few years of sanctions that have been put on by the US government, and it's a really different story. A UN special rapporteur, an American one at that, Alfred de Zayas, visited the country and declared that the sanctions the United States were putting on Venezuela were akin to, quote, a medieval siege, end quote. And he also declared the US as possibly guilty of crimes against humanity against the country. And he's estimated that at least 100,000 Venezuelans have died because of this, because the economy crashes. Things like diabetes and cancer medicine are just completely blocked from coming in. And so this is, what happens in this country. In 1998, Venezuelans ate fewer than 2,000 calories per day. Up to 2013, that had actually grown to over 3,000 calories a day. But now, because Venezuela is a country that imports so much of its food, there is a dire, or at least certainly was for quite some time, a dire food crisis. The Venezuelan government tried to get around this by kind of moving out with the capitalist system and directly purchasing from local farmers food, which it would then give out in local markets, basically as rations or as extremely subsidized food. The system was called CLAP, and it's one of the most popular systems that the Venezuelan government has got right now. I think more than half of all families have benefited from it. But ultimately, that has really drawn the US's ire. Just a little while ago, there was almost a war scare in the country as Iran and Iranian ships tried to enter Venezuelan waters to give the country oil and also, I think, replacement parts for a lot of their oil industry, which has been pretty much broken by the United States. Venezuela wasn't able to sell its main commodity, which is oil, to most countries because those countries feared what would happen if they traded with Venezuela. If you do get caught trading with Venezuela, that company is liable not only to having their assets frozen, but their directors can also face decades in prison. And as we've seen with cases like Alex Saab or cases like Julian Assange or whomever, the United States, the long arm of the law really does extend around the world in that case. This isn't to say that it has been all one way, though. The United Nations, for its part, has been completely against the sanctions from day one. They constantly vote on them, condemning the United Nations. They also even started discussing the reparations that the US should start paying to Venezuela, although that hasn't really gone very far because the US is pretty much the world hegemon. You asked about whether we're going to see much change. Ultimately, when it comes to foreign policy, a lot of the time it doesn't really matter whether a Democrat or a Republican is in charge. The policy remains the same. We saw, for instance, in the 2010s, the Obama administration opening up slightly towards Cuba. Everybody said this might be a new dawn, and then Trump shut that door. Well, what has Biden done? Has he reopened that door? No, he hasn't, because circumstances, economic and political ones, have changed, which means that ultimately the Democrats now are as hawkish on Cuba as the Republicans were, or almost as hawkish. I mean, some of the Republicans really are completely off at the deep end when it comes to Cuba. And it's pretty much the same with Venezuela. In President Biden's statements of intent that he released, he pretty much said that he would be working towards regime change in Venezuela. We've seen many attempts throughout the years, mostly from Republicans, but certainly the Democrats haven't really taken their foot off the gas exactly when it comes to regime change in Venezuela. Biden is still recognizing Juan Guaido, for instance, now one of the only countries that does so. Juan Guaido, if you don't know, is this sort of self-proclaimed president, this sort of moderately well-known politician of the far right in Venezuela, who just one day proclaimed himself the president, and the United States government went along with it. This charade still continues to this day, but it's getting weaker and weaker. And yet the Biden administration still goes on with it. So yeah, when it comes to Venezuela, I think not much has changed since when you were there, Mnar.
Yeah, I had the opportunity of being there last year. I actually met with Camila Saab and I interviewed her. And it sounds like you were also in Venezuela as well, Kit. Is that correct? You're muted.
No, I've not been to Venezuela.
Oh, you haven't. My bad. I don't know why I thought you were in Venezuela. But
No,
it's obvious that the way the sanctions work, it has kind of pushed these global South countries to try to circumvent the sanctions by turning to cryptocurrencies. But I want to turn to a big story that has to do with the Democratic Party and FTX. So this is another big crypto story this week that's been in the news about crypto billionaire Sam Bankman-Fried. He's the founder of cryptocurrency exchange FTX. He was arrested in the Bahamas, and there has been so much media coverage about Bankman's lies and deceit. But one aspect of the story that many people don't know about, that we've covered and that you've also exposed, is SBF and FTX connections to the Ukraine war. Could you fill us in about that and what you found in your investigation?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, yes, you mentioned that Sam Bankman-Fried got arrested. Yes, what timing when he was due to testify under oath to the House Committee on Finance. But yeah, I mean, in effect, this is something that jumped out to me very. I was following the FTX story from when it broke, and one of the things that jumped out to me very, very quickly was this agreement it had that his company, Sam Bankman-Fried's company FTX, had with the government of Ukraine, and it was called Aid for Ukraine. And in effect, this was a mechanism by which cryptocurrency users and firms could donate to Ukraine's war effort. And every kind of angle I approached this from, and every road I went down just raised further questions and further concerns. There has been some conspiracy theorizing. People have run far ahead of available evidence and suggested that it was actually a secret democratic fundraising operation. There's no evidence of that as yet, and I don't think it will emerge. I think this is something very different. But equally, it's been completely ignored by the mainstream media, which I think is very interesting in itself. And there have been attempts, to the extent it's been acknowledged, it's to debunk the notion that there was anything shady there, which is when people in power tell you where not to look, you should start looking very carefully at that precise at that specific point. But yeah, in effect, it seems that yes, that this resource did raise money for Ukraine, and some of it was accounted for in the sense. But I think that one of the things that I find very, very, very strange and incongruous is this website was set up in mid. It was just called. It was a page on the Ukrainian government's website, and it was set up in mid-March, and by the end of March, it claimed that 70 million had been raised. Now, a few days later, the website was updated to state that only 60 million had been raised, which is all, I mean, that's kind of eyebrow raising in and of itself. Although, I mean, you know, you might argue that 10 million is a rather, you know, comparatively paltry sum given all, you know, the billions that are flowing seemingly weekly to Kiev. But yeah, so I mean, the 60 million figure is strange in itself, because this has remained unchanged since April 6th. It was spun out into a website towards the end of October, a standalone website. I mean, this is, you know, rather conveniently only a few days before the FTX started collapsing. Although, I mean, that could just be a coincidence. But the very odd thing, yeah, is that they say that, oh, well, only 60 million has been raised, and that's they have totals published on their website from April and July on what this was spent on. And it was stuff like, you know, media campaigns and bullets and fuel and all this other stuff that you might expect in a war. But it's been collecting money ever since then. So you know, and you can see from publicly available you know, blockchain records that, you know, the vast sums that have been flowing there. Now, apparently this hasn't been used, which is, you know, bearing in mind that the Ukrainian government spent 100 million in crypto between February 24th and March 10th. That seems, you know, rather suspicious. I mean, yeah, so, you know, quite clearly, the Ukrainian government has questions to answer. The answers could be exculpatory, or, you know, is this being embezzled? Is this being funneled towards black operations so they don't, you know, crop up on books, so to speak? Yeah, that's very that's very curious. And I mean, I think as well that the you know, the Democrat angle. I mean, yes, it's not a case of this money being sent to the Democrats, but there's clearly a component of the story that is highly applicable to the party. I mean, you know, Sam Bankman-Fried was Joe Biden's second biggest donor in 2020. Since then, he has been consistently the Democratic Party's second biggest donor, giving them tens of millions of dollars. In June this year, after a series of high-level meetings at the White House, Sam Bankman-Fried announced he would give $1 billion to the Democrats to ensure they won in 2024. But then he rode that back and said that he was just, you know, speaking incautiously and the proposal was dumb, quote unquote. But not only that, he said that he was going to end all political fundraising at all, which is extremely curious to have gone. You know, he had no background apart from his parents were heavily involved in Democratic campaigning. But he himself had no background in activism, campaigning, fundraising, or political donation. And then suddenly he, you know, becomes very, very, very generous. There have been suggestions that it was in order to buy political favor, because he also did send money, some much smaller amounts, to you know, kind of more centrist Republicans like Mitt Romney. But I mean, you know, that seems to only be half of the story. I mean, FTX was founded in April 2019, which is the very month that Biden started announced his run for president again. You know, he's a very well connected individual. It would be unsurprising. I mean, it seems very clear based on an initial bankruptcy filing from FTX's new court imposed CEO, who oversaw Enron's bankruptcy, as it happens, that there was a total lack of financial control. At FTX, they did not keep records. They hired an auditor for our media research from Facebook's metaverse. All very odd. I mean, and that's what makes the story even more suspicious, is that the FTX gained tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, from venture capital firms, and indeed was valued at many billions. Now, venture capital funds are certainly not infallible. They do often make bad investments, but they're certainly not stupid. And you know, they particularly the kind of top tier firms who invested in FTX, they hire specifically experts in particular fields to look under the hood, so to speak, of companies before they invest in them. They would have wanted, you know, all of this financial information, which apparently didn't exist. You know, typically they would require all of these records and a very clear model of how this company would turn a profit. It seems that most of FTX's marketing materials were Excel spreadsheets authored by Sam Bankman-Fried himself. That's very curious. And it would be unsurprising to me if at least partially the company was did exist as a Democratic Party fundraising vehicle, and that yes, that sums that seem to have gone missing could have been sent in the direction of the White House, or Delaware, one way or another. But yes, I mean, I think that when Bankman-Fried rode back on his pledge to give $1 billion to the Democrats, this is not long after the state of Texas, which is of course a Republican red state through and through, and is also, this is it's a state rather than federal level. Financial regulators there announced a probe into FTX, and this was basically ignored in the media at the time, but that absolutely would not have been ignored in the offices of FTX, as chaotic and inept as they seem to have been, Bankman-Fried and his et al. And yes, I mean, and it may well have in turn set off alarm bells within the Democratic Party. They would not want anyone looking at this more closely, which might account for why he said, "Oh yes, I'm not going to give any more money at all," because he'd drawn too much attention to himself.
There we go. Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, that article Kit is referencing is, you can also read it at MintPress. It's called FTX Partnership with Ukraine is Latest Chapter in Shady Western Aid Saga. One line from it that I was particularly struck by was SBS promised to, quote, turn Bitcoin into bullets. To what extent did Sam Bankman-Fried actually help the Ukrainian government? Or for that matter, anyone in Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, whoever?
Well, I mean, it's certainly claimed, as I mentioned on the website, that it gives kind of detailed totals of what this money was supposedly spent on by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. We could give them the benefit of the doubt, and that yes, that 60 million has been invested accordingly. Yes, where the rest of the funds have gone, we do not know, and there's an awful lot of them. I think as well that there was something else that I found deeply suspicious, was that there is a university in Kiev that is has been sourcing aid donations since the start of the war, and has been handing out humanitarian aid. Now, one of the key claims by Ukrainian government officials and tech bros involved in aid for Ukraine was that they didn't hold their money with FTX, that the FTX just served as to convert cryptocurrency into fiat, and that these services were only used in March. I mean, that in turn begs the question of why Sam Bankman-Fried's face and name were prominently featured on Aid for Ukraine's website until November 15th, long after his company had filed for bankruptcy and he'd been exposed as a fraud. But yes, so this university allegedly held FTX crypto wallets. I emailed them and asked how much money they made or held with FTX. They said they'd get back to me, and they never have, despite repeated nudging. Maybe they're just very busy, but it's just it just seems very odd that of course that the war in Ukraine has been an absolute feeding frenzy for corruption and embezzlement, and Ukraine was already a heavily corrupt country. It was the most corrupt country in Europe by some margin before this started. Zelensky has, a vast amount of money hidden in, offshore accounts, hiding from the tax man. It was calculated that about a third of Ukraine's GDP annually was lost to corruption. And there are numerous reports from foreign mercenaries who fought with the International Legion against the Russians, that there was a highly professionalized arms smuggling / black market operation where weapons would arrive in one van and then another van would turn up and collect some, and people who reported this to the SBU were ignored or got into trouble. There was this one absolutely blood-curdling story from an American mercenary who said that there was a bunch of foreign soldiers who were very much pissing off their commanders by pointing out kind of corruption and mismanagement, and they were subsequently sent on a mission across a minefield without being told there were mines there. So yes, I mean it's there, and I mean the media, of course, is completely uninterested in tackling this stuff, seriously or objectively. There was that CBS documentary in August which noted that only about 30% of the weapons sent to Ukraine actually get to the front line, and there was a massive online backlash, and they ended up pulling the documentary temporarily and re-editing it to say, oh, actually now a lot more gets there, which is very reassuring. But I mean, my point here is that everything that Sam Bankman-Fried was involved in was basically criminal from top to bottom. There are 134 separate shell companies tied to him, which will no doubt have been used for money laundering and tax evasion purposes. It appears that people who are listed as staff at various companies either didn't exist or have vanished into thin air, which is very curious. And so, but yes, so we are to believe that the highly corrupt individual involved in a highly corrupt string of companies who is managing aid, which is always produces a feeding frenzy for grift and fraud overseas, like running an aid program for a highly corrupt government during a political environment which encourages and facilitates fraud was above board. Like, I don't buy it. That doesn't make sense. Like, if it would be the one thing that Sam Bankman-Fried ever touched that wasn't fraudulent. And yeah, I don't believe that for a second.
Well, Kit, that kind of sums up our conversation today. We really appreciate you being here, and we certainly learned a lot. We appreciate your investigative work into both FTX, SAM, Ukraine, and this whole cryptocurrency world, and Anomaly 6, to show that there really is no such thing as any sort of privacy online. I think that's pretty much the conclusion of all of these revelations. And it's kind of an illusion that we have any sort of privacy. So we really appreciate you being here. And Alan, thank you for joining us today. This podcast will be available in an audio version as well, streaming on any of your favorite podcast platforms when you search for MintCast. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Good to be with you.